It started as a whisper, low and venomous, weaving through the cracks of the classroom like smoke. A few students leaned closer to each other, shielding their mouths with their hands, exchanging cruel grins. The idea, once spoken, spread quickly. A game, they said, a harmless dare. But the way they glanced toward her said otherwise. She sat alone near the window, a thin shaft of sunlight catching the side of her face. Her braids were neatly tied back, her notebook open in front of her, filled with tidy rows of notes. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she chose not to, the way the laughter twisted whenever her name was whispered. The plan was simple. They would hand her a problem so impossible, so absurdly complex, that she would be humiliated in front of everyone. Because to them, her skin was a mark of inferiority. Because in their twisted logic, a black girl who dared to excel had to be broken back into her place. They crafted it with care, pages of convoluted equations stitched together like a monstrous puzzle. None of them could solve it themselves. That wasn't the point. They didn't need to succeed. They only needed her to fail. From the back of the room, one of them, the ringleader, always the loudest, folded the paper and passed it hand to hand until it landed on her desk, casual, like an accident. The entire class seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the show to begin. She looked up, puzzled, as the paper landed. Around her, the snickers grew louder. Somewhere, in the front row, a boy whispered just loud enough, "Let's see if she's as smart as she thinks she is." The words, dipped in contempt, hit harder than any slap. For a moment, she didn't move. The laughter, the challenge, the venom in the air, it all wrapped around her like chains. But the trap was set. There was no way to leave now without confirming what they already wanted to believe. The bell hadn't rung yet. The room stretched on, endless, a stage set for her fall. The sound of laughter was a thick, oppressive cloud that hung in the classroom, sinking deeper with each passing moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't show it, not yet. The paper sat in front of her, a cruel reminder of the trap they had set. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her back, the constant stares from behind, the silent expectations pressing her forward. She forced herself to focus, to block out the murmurs, but it was impossible. The whispers snaked through the room like poison, their cruel words laced with mockery. Her name was repeated over and over, always followed by laughter. "Do you think she'll get it right? She's not that smart, is she?" Every word a sharpened blade aimed at her pride, her dignity, her identity. She wanted to look up, to meet their eyes, let them know she was not afraid. But fear surged within her, fear not of the problem itself, no. That would come later, but of what their hate might do to her if she failed. Fear of the labels they would place on her if she showed weakness. Around her, the room felt like it was closing in. The boys, seated in the back, were whispering louder now, their words thick with arrogance. They seemed to think they had won before she even had a chance to answer. And she could see it in their eyes, that ugly belief that she didn't belong there, that a girl like her, with skin like hers, could never be the one to succeed. The teacher, too, had averted her gaze, pretending to busy herself with papers, unwilling to intervene. The class was a theater, and she was the only one on stage. But this wasn't a performance. This was real. Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk tightly, the sharp wood digging into her palm. She could feel the sweat starting to form on her forehead, but she wiped it away quickly, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing her nervous. They were waiting for her to fail. She could feel it. The silence was deafening, and she could hear the faintest whispers from the back of the room. "She's not smart enough. Watch her screw it up. Let's see how she embarrasses herself." The word stung like a slap to the face, but she refused to let them break her. No one would define her, not today. The pressure was unbearable, but she pushed through it. She forced herself to look at the problem again, to focus. The numbers on the page began to blur, but she wouldn't let them control her. She couldn't afford to lose. Not now, not like this. With a deep breath, she began to write, her pencil moving with deliberate precision, each stroke of the lead cutting through the tension that wrapped around her chest like a vice. Her mind was a whirlwind, but she kept it focused, one equation after another. The numbers began to make sense, like a puzzle piecing itself together in front of her. She couldn't fail. Not today. Let's take a small pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something similar in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's continue. The air in the classroom felt heavier now. It wasn't just the weight of the problem she was facing. No, it was the weight of their expectations, their cruel laughter echoing in her ears, suffocating her like a tight noose. She could feel the eyes of every student, every pair of sneering eyes focused on her. She was their target now. They had all made their judgments. They were waiting for her to fall, and if she did, they would feast on her humiliation like wolves on a carcass. The problem she was supposed to solve was not just hard, it was designed to be impossible. The numbers, twisted in ways that didn't make sense, danced across the page like an insurmountable wall. There were no shortcuts, no clear path, just a tangled mess of symbols, mocking her, daring her to try. She knew it. She knew it before she even picked up her pencil. This was no ordinary test. It wasn't about math anymore. It was about proving something to them, about showing them that they couldn't break her. But the weight of their expectations made her feel small, and deep down, a voice whispered, "What if you fail?" She shook her head, trying to push that thought away. The room seemed to grow colder with every passing second. The silence was a tangible force now, pressing against her chest, suffocating her with its weight. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears, could feel the sweat on her palms. One of the boys in the back, the one who had started it all, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. "This should be good," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the class to hear. "I'm betting she'll screw this up." The others laughed, a low, mocking sound that only fueled the tension in the room. The teacher, who had been avoiding the scene, now stood at the front of the class, her eyes darting nervously between the students. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. This was no longer about education. It was about power. Power, and the cruel satisfaction of seeing someone, especially someone like her, brought low. She took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The pencil felt cold in her hand as she picked it up, the tip gliding across the paper, making the first few marks. She tried to ignore the whispers, the laughter, the weight of the room pressing on her. She had to focus. Focus on the problem. Focus on the numbers. Focus on something, anything, to drown out the voices. But the numbers seemed to mock her, twisting and turning in her mind like a dance she couldn't follow. For every step she took, the problem seemed to shift, moving out of her reach, pulling away from her grasp. Her mind raced, but the solution remained just beyond her fingertips. The class watched, breathless. The laughter had stopped. Now, they were waiting for her to crack, waiting for the moment when the weight of their expectations, the weight of the impossible problem, would break her. But then, something shifted. Something inside her clicked into place. The numbers, the equations, started to fall into line. The room was completely silent now. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the outcome. She could feel it. The eyes, the stares, all focused on her. The weight of their judgment pressed down harder than before. But this time, it wasn't just mockery or disbelief that they expected. It was failure. They wanted her to break. They wanted to see her crumble under the impossible weight of the equation, to fall and prove them right. Her hand shook as she pressed the pencil to the paper again. Her fingers had become numb from the strain, but she could not stop now. There was no turning back. The numbers on the page danced before her eyes, spinning, taunting her, but she had come so far. She had already proven to herself that she could think, that she could survive this moment. Still, there was a part of her, a deep, dark part, that feared what would happen if she failed. What if they were right? What if she wasn't good enough? What if they tore her apart for good? But then something strange happened. The world around her seemed to blur, the noise of the room fading into the background. All that mattered was the paper, the numbers, and her mind. The pressure, the weight of their eyes, it all began to dissipate. It was just her and the equation now. She took another deep breath, steadying herself. Focus, she told herself. You can do this. She began to write again, faster now, each stroke of her pencil more confident than the last. The numbers on the page didn't seem as hostile anymore. They began to fall into place, one by one, like soldiers in formation, ready to be conquered. It was a dance of logic, a battle of wills between her mind and the impossible problem. And for the first time, she felt like she might just win. But as she neared the final answer, a voice interrupted her concentration. One of the boys, the same one who had mocked her earlier, stood up, laughing loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. Well, look at this. She thinks she can actually solve it. His friends joined in, their laughter ringing through the classroom like nails on a chalkboard. This is gonna be good. You really think you can pull this off? The laughter stung, like sharp blades cutting into her resolve. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show fear. They wanted her to doubt herself. They wanted her to stop. But she couldn't. Not now. She had already come too far. With one final breath, she wrote the last numbers on the paper. She looked up, meeting the eyes of the boy who had been so sure she would fail. His expression faltered for a moment. For a brief second, she felt a strange sense of triumph. She had done it. She had solved the impossible problem. And then, just as quickly, the teacher walked up to her desk, glancing at the paper. There was a long silence as she looked it over. The class waited with bated breath. And then, the teacher spoke. The room held its breath. It was as if time had stopped completely, each second stretching into infinity. Her heart hammered in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. She watched the teacher's face, trying to read her expression, but it was unreadable, blank as a mask. The entire class was watching, waiting for her to either confirm their worst fears or for her to do the unthinkable, to give them a reason to feel embarrassed, to be the ones to fall. The teacher's eyes moved slowly over the paper. For a moment, it seemed like she wasn't even breathing. The class shifted uneasily, whispers creeping through the room, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her gaze was fixed on the equation, her lips slightly parted, as if waiting for something to happen, for the numbers to speak to her in the way they had spoken to the girl. Finally, she set the paper down and raised her eyes to the girl's face. Her voice broke the silence, cold and detached, as though she were examining a piece of art, not a student's work. "You've solved it." There was a pause, a long, drawn-out pause. The weight of her words fell heavily in the room. The girl's chest tightened, unsure of what came next. Would the teacher acknowledge her victory, or was there another test to endure? The boy who had mocked her earlier, the one who had been so certain of her failure, stood up. His face was flushed. The arrogance that had once filled him now replaced by disbelief. "What?" he snapped, his voice breaking. "That's not possible. There's no way she could have solved it." His words were met with an awkward silence, but the girl could feel their eyes on her again. This time, there was no laughter. There was only the sound of her heart, pounding in her ears, as if daring them to say anything more. The teacher didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a step back, her gaze never leaving the girl. Then, she slowly turned to face the class, her expression hardening. "This is not a game. This is not about humiliating someone or proving them wrong," she said, her voice rising, her anger now palpable. "This is about respect. And today, you will all learn what that truly means." The classroom was dead silent. No one moved. No one dared to speak. For the first time, the power dynamics in the room had shifted. The girl wasn't the weak one anymore. She wasn't the one who had been mocked, the one who had been humiliated. She was the one who had solved the impossible problem. She was the one who had defied expectations, who had stood her ground in the face of cruelty. And now, the class had no choice but to see her as more than just a black girl in their eyes. They had no choice but to recognize her strength. But the moment of victory was fleeting. There was still the sting of the boy's harsh words, still the weight of everything she had endured. It was hard to feel completely triumphant when the scars of their hatred still lingered. The teacher's eyes softened just slightly, a glimmer of something resembling respect flickering behind her usually cold gaze. But before the girl could fully process the change, the teacher spoke again. "You'll stay after class, both of you," she said, turning to the boy who had challenged her. "We need to have a talk about respect. All of us." The boy's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to protest, but the teacher silenced him with a sharp glance. "Stay." Now, the silence in the classroom was now unbearable. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited for the teacher to speak again. The girl felt the weight of all the eyes on her once more. But this time, she didn't flinch. Her pulse was still racing, but there was something inside her that had changed. She had just proven something to herself and to them. Her breath was shallow, but steady. She had solved the problem. She had earned the respect of her teacher. But what about the others? What would they think now? Would the boy who had mocked her, the one who had tried to tear her down, learn anything from this? Or would he remain the same arrogant, prejudiced person he had always been? The teacher's eyes were locked on the boy now, her gaze unyielding. "I want to hear from you," she said, her voice no longer cold but firm, authoritative. "What do you think about what just happened?" The boy hesitated for a moment, looking at the teacher as if he didn't quite understand what she was asking. But then, his eyes flickered over to the girl, and the confidence that had once been so strong in him seemed to falter. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know," he muttered. His voice had lost its earlier sharpness, now dull and unsure. "I didn't think she could do it. I thought she'd fail." He avoided looking at her directly, but the shame was clear in his voice. The teacher nodded slowly, her gaze softening just a bit. "And why did you think that?" she asked, her tone quieter now, almost probing. The boy shifted in his seat again, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The other students, who had been silently watching, seemed to be waiting for him to admit what they all already knew, the truth. Because she's not like us, he said, his voice trailing off. There it was, the prejudice that had been simmering beneath the surface, the ugly truth that no one wanted to say aloud. The girl's heart sank, but she refused to let his words show. She had already come so far, she had already proven her worth, and she wasn't about to let this boy or anyone else define her. The teacher, however, did not let the moment slip away. So, you thought she was incapable because of the color of her skin? She asked, her voice now sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. The boy looked up, his face flushing red with embarrassment. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. He started, but the teacher raised a hand, silencing him. You don't need to explain, she said. We all heard you, and you know what? You're wrong. Not only were you wrong, but you also disrespected her. You didn't just doubt her abilities, you doubted her humanity. The room was silent again, the weight of the teacher's words sinking in. The girl could feel the room shift. The boy's shoulders were slumped, and the others seemed to be watching him closely, some with disbelief, others with shame. She couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The scars of their earlier mockery still lingered. The teacher turned her gaze back to the girl, her expression softer now. I am sorry, she said quietly. I should have said something sooner. You didn't deserve that. She paused, looking around the room. None of you did. The girl didn't know how to respond. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the teacher to speak out in her defense. It wasn't something that happened often. She had learned to live without validation from others, to fight for herself. But this moment, felt different. The teacher's voice broke through her thoughts. You should all take a lesson from this. Respect isn't something that should be earned by proving yourself. It's something you give to others, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what they look like. The girl nodded, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time, pride. But it wasn't over yet. We'll take a short pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? And has anything like this ever happened to you in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to continue following our journey. Now, let's continue. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but the weight of the day lingered. The girl gathered her things slowly, each movement deliberate. The room was filled with the usual noise of students packing up, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that her life had shifted in a way she couldn't fully understand yet. The boy who had mocked her earlier sat silently at his desk, not making eye contact with anyone. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze glued to the surface of his desk. He wasn't even pretending to be confident anymore. His earlier arrogance had dissolved, replaced with something more vulnerable, something resembling regret, though he wasn't brave enough to admit it. As she walked out of the classroom, she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her. Some watched her with quiet admiration, while others looked away, unsure of how to approach her now. She didn't need to look back to know that the dynamic had shifted. They had seen her power. They had witnessed the way she stood tall in the face of their prejudice, and that, in itself, was enough to change their perceptions. Her thoughts were interrupted as she stepped into the hallway and saw her mother standing near the door, waiting for her. Her mother's presence was a calm in the storm of emotions that swirled inside her. She hadn't expected her mother to be there. After everything that had happened, after all the humiliation and the painful moments, she had assumed her mother would be too busy to pick her up today. But here she was, as always, a constant, unwavering support. Hey, sweetheart, her mother said with a warm smile, her voice soft and soothing. How did it go? The girl hesitated for a moment before replying. Her throat felt tight, and she struggled to find the right words. How could she explain everything that had just happened? How could she explain the weight of being doubted, ridiculed, and mocked, only to turn around and prove them all wrong? Her mother smiled, her eyes softening as she placed a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. I know you did, and you're going to keep proving them wrong. Every single day. You have so much more strength than you even realize. The girl didn't reply right away, but her heart swelled with gratitude for her mother's unwavering support. It was something she had always known. But today, in the aftermath of everything, it felt like a lifeline. She wasn't alone in this fight. Do you think they'll change? The girl asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Do you think they'll ever see me for who I really am? Her mother's smile faded slightly as she thought for a moment. I hope so. But remember, sweetheart, change isn't something that happens overnight. It takes time, and not everyone will change, but you can keep showing them who you are. Keep being you, and eventually, some of them will come around. The girl nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. She didn't know if the others would ever fully understand her or see her as more than just the color of her skin. But she knew one thing for sure: she would keep fighting. She would keep proving her worth, and she would never let anyone define her again. As they walked together out of the school, the girl couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. There was still so much work to be done, so many battles to fight, but today had been a victory, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel small. And she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Days passed, but the aftershocks of the classroom incident didn't fade. If anything, the ripple effects of that moment seemed to grow with each passing day. At first, the girl thought she could move on, but she began to realize that what had happened in that classroom had sparked something much bigger. She started noticing the subtle changes in her interactions with others. Her classmates, those who had once ignored her or made cruel jokes, were suddenly acknowledging her. Some avoided her eyes, unsure of how to act, while others offered tentative smiles or half-hearted attempts at conversations. The dynamics in the school had shifted, but it wasn't just her classmates who were affected. The teachers, too, seemed to look at her with a newfound respect. It was as if they were seeing her for the first time, as if the veil of prejudice had been lifted, even if only slightly. But not everyone was ready to change. There were still the bullies, the ones who refused to let go of their hatred. The girl overheard whispers in the hallway, heard the muffled laughter from behind closed doors. She saw the glances exchanged between the same students who had made her feel small, trying to regain their sense of superiority by whispering behind her back. Their words didn't carry the same power they once did, but that didn't stop them from trying. And then there was the boy, the one who had been so confident, so sure of himself when he had mocked her in front of the class. He had been quiet since that day, but there were moments when she would catch him staring at her from across the room, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, nor was it regret. It was something else, something deeper, more conflicted. She wondered if, deep down, he was struggling with his own shame. Despite everything, she didn't want revenge. She didn't want to see him broken. She didn't want him to suffer in the way that so many had made her suffer. What she wanted was understanding. She wanted him to see her, really see her, not just the color of her skin, not just the stereotype she was forced to carry. But she knew that change wouldn't come easily, and certainly not at her command. It wasn't up to her to fix him. It was up to him to learn, to confront his own biases. The girl found solace in the quiet moments. When the world around her became too loud, too chaotic, she would retreat into herself, into her thoughts. She would focus on her studies, on the things that she loved, the things that made her feel powerful and whole. One afternoon, as she sat in the library reading, her mother came in to visit her. She had been working late, but she always made time for her daughter. As she sat down beside her, the girl looked up from her book and smiled faintly. "How's everything going?" her mother asked gently. The girl paused, thinking carefully. "It's different," she said, her voice soft. "People are looking at me differently. Some are trying to be nice, but I can tell it's not real. They're trying to make up for something, but I don't know if I can trust it yet." Her mother nodded, her face a mixture of understanding and concern. "People's perceptions take time to change, sweetheart. Don't expect them to suddenly understand everything. You've made an impact, though, even if it's not always obvious. You've planted a seed. Now you have to give it time to grow." The girl sighed, the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her chest. "I just wish it was easier. I wish they could see that I'm just like them, that I'm not any different." Her mother smiled warmly, her hand resting on her daughter's. "Sweetheart, you are different, but that's what makes you so special. Don't ever forget that. You're going to make a difference in ways you can't even imagine yet." The girl smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of her mother's words settle into her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was stronger than she had ever realized. As she walked home that evening, the girl found herself thinking about everything that had happened, the struggles, the victories, the pain, and the lessons learned. She had faced unimaginable hate and prejudice, and yet, she was still standing. She had proven that her worth wasn't defined by the color of her skin or by the opinions of others. She had proven that she could rise above it all. And she knew, without a doubt, that she was just beginning. The days after the incident had been a blur. Everything had changed, but the girl wasn't sure if it had changed for the better. It was as though the world was turning around her, with new layers of complexity unfolding each time she blinked. There were good days, where she felt stronger, more in control of herself, and there were bad days. Days where the weight of everything seemed too much to carry. She had tried to put the incident behind her, to focus on her studies and keep her head down. But the whispers and the stares followed her, no matter where she went. The boys who had laughed at her in class were still there, still looking for an opportunity to remind her that, in their eyes, she was still beneath them. Some were cleverer now, less direct, but their hate was still there, veiled, subtle, insidious. It was hard to tell if things were getting better or worse. The girl had hoped that standing up for herself would have a bigger impact on her classmates. But the truth was, many were still stuck in their old ways. They had been raised to see the world in black and white, and now they were struggling to reconcile that with the reality in front of them. Even the teachers, those who had seemed so supportive at first, were starting to show cracks. The principal, who had congratulated her for solving the impossible problem, was now acting distant, like he wasn't sure if he had made the right decision in praising her. There was a new tension in the air whenever she walked into a room, a silent judgment that she couldn't escape. Her family, on the other hand, remained a constant source of support. Her mother, especially, had been a rock, no matter how difficult things got. Her mother's wisdom and strength provided a steady anchor for the girl to hold on to. One evening, the girl sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had just finished her homework, but her mind was far from the equations on the paper. She felt like she was losing herself in the noise of everything, the whispers, the stares, the constant sense of being different. Her mother came into the room, noticing the exhaustion in her daughter's eyes. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself," her mother said softly, pulling a chair beside her. The girl looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. "I don't know how much more I can take, Mom. I feel like I'm always fighting, always proving something. It's exhausting." Her mother nodded, understanding all too well. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but you've already proven more than they will ever understand. You've shown them that they can't define you, that your worth is not for them to judge. What you've done goes far beyond any problem you solved in class. You've changed the narrative, even if they don't see it yet." The girl smiled weakly, her heart heavy but comforted by her mother's words. It was true, she had changed something, and maybe that was the first step, but it still didn't feel like enough. The next day, as she walked into school, she found herself once again facing the same stares. But today, something was different. She could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just the eyes that followed her, it was the tone of the whispers, the way they seemed to pause when she passed. It was almost as if the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. And then, as she walked into her next class, she caught sight of him, the boy, the one who had taunted her in front of the whole class. He was sitting at his desk, his usual arrogance replaced by an unreadable expression. He looked up as she entered, his eyes meeting hers for a moment before quickly looking away. But something had changed. It was subtle, but it was there. The girl didn't know what had caused the shift, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't the same person she had been when this all started. She was stronger now, more resilient, and even if the world around her didn't always understand, she had come to understand herself. She didn't need their approval. She had nothing to prove to them. She sat down at her desk, took a deep breath, and focused on the lesson. The rest of the class might have been frozen in the past, but she was moving forward, and no one could hold her back. The final day came unexpectedly, like a storm that had been gathering quietly in the distance. The girl had spent weeks anticipating this moment. Even though she hadn't known it was coming, she could feel the tension in the air. But there was something different now, something she couldn't name, but something powerful. The days of subtle insults and judgment had given way to something more overt, something she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel less than, less capable, less worthy, and in a way, it was about the very system that allowed that to happen. The girl stood in front of the class, the weight of the past few weeks pressing against her chest. She had changed. The quiet, unsure girl who had entered the school months ago had been replaced by someone who stood tall and unyielding, someone who had discovered a strength she never knew she had. Her classmates, those who had taunted her, those who had laughed at her, those who had watched and done nothing, sat quietly in their seats. There was no more jeering, no more mocking. In fact, there was an eerie silence that filled the room, as though they were all holding their breath, waiting for the final chapter of this story to unfold. The teacher, who had once praised her but now avoided her gaze, stood at the front of the room. His eyes were on the floor, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He was unsure, caught between his previous support for the girl and the pressure of the school's administration, the community's expectations. But the girl wasn't interested in his uncertainty. She had long since learned that the world would not give her the answers she wanted. She had to find them herself. Today, the girl began, her voice steady but strong. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not here to prove anything to any of you. I'm not here to prove that I'm worthy, that I'm smart, that I belong, because I don't need your validation. Her words echoed through the classroom, causing her classmates to exchange uneasy glances. She could see the discomfort in their eyes, the shifting of bodies in their seats. They were used to the quiet girl, the one who kept her head down. But this girl wasn't afraid to speak her truth. I've spent too long letting your hate, your ignorance, dictate how I see myself, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. I've spent too long trying to fit into a world that wasn't designed for me, but not anymore. She paused, her breath steady as she gathered her thoughts, letting her words sink in. The tension in the room thickened. She could feel it, the energy of the moment building as she prepared to reveal something she had kept hidden for so long. The girl had come to understand one fundamental truth: her worth was never tied to their opinions. I am not the sum of your judgments. I am not your stereotypes. I am not the box you want to put me in. I am everything you never expected. I am more than just a girl who solved an impossible math problem. I am a person, a human being, who has the right to exist, to thrive, and to be seen for who I truly am. The room was dead silent. Not even a cough or a shift in position could be heard. The girl could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't looking for their approval. She didn't need it. She had found her own strength, and that was enough. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, the girl turned and walked out of the room. The whispers that had once followed her, the mocking laughter, the stares, they were all gone now, swallowed up by her defiance. She had learned to stand tall in the face of it all, and she knew that no matter what they said or did, no one could ever take away her sense of self-worth. She walked through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the empty space, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. She had fought, not with fists or words, but with something much stronger, her unshakable belief in herself. She was no longer the girl they had tried to break. She was the woman she was always meant to be. And as the final chapter closed on that part of her life, she knew the battle wasn't over. It would never be over. But now, she was ready for whatever came next. No longer afraid, no longer silent. She was a force, and nothing could stop her.